Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Watch Your Heroes Fall. This will be part 31, chapter 35, entitled Phase 4, Song 6, Cracks, by the Freestylers featuring Belle Humble. Kurogiri and Jean pick up the empty mugs and retrieve cookies from the oven after the others fall asleep. Izuku had not made it to his room, and Dabi had ignored the shocked cries and said, "Called it," and picked Izuku up with more care than anyone expected, and helped his little brother tuck Izuku into bed before Dabi went to his own room. Everyone seems to respect the exhausted silence of the house. Izuku had barely had time to explain the next steps, and whoever wasn't sleeping was getting things in order for the end. That island drawing steadily closer with every tick of Izuku's timer, currently displayed on the muted TV in the corner of the bar, courtesy of Hero News Daily's special ongoing report of the League of Villains' newest ultimatum. Kurogiri has nothing to put in order. Jean has decided that he does not care to put anything in order because he is at peace with the whole thing, and Kurogiri needs someone to help him pick up empty mugs and retrieve cookies from the oven more than Jean needs to bid farewell to the bare mattress Compass helped bring home from the dumpster or the 1,000 thread-count sheets Momo made him. Jean knows Himiko is pulling together her most prized possessions, a shiny piece of trash Dabi gave her as a gift, the deck of cards Compass tried to use to teach her how to shuffle adequately, the face wash Magne insisted that Himiko use to either say goodbye or to try and pack them up to take with her. Jean put some of the cookies in an ornate little box that Magne had brought back from the dump one day and sets it to the side. "Kurogiri," he says. Kurogiri startles. He does that now sometimes, like he expected to be called something else and has to reorient himself to who he is now. He turns. His expression resubmerges in smoke, and Jean can still make out the patient smile. Even for someone as old as Jean, Kurogiri was wired, very intentionally, Jean now realizes, to be paternal. Jean deposits the mugs in the sink and starts to wash them. He doesn't have to. In fact, it's a bit of a waste of time in the long run, but leaving them dirty in the sink would feel disrespectful to this run-down old bar that held them and nurtured them and softened their edges and allowed their motley fucking gang to call it home. Jean's not sure what to say. He knows where this conversation will end, but where to start it. He says, "You talk different, sometimes now." Kurogiri nods and helps Jean dry the mugs. Jean says, "Do you—" He suppresses a tick, but it comes out in his neck anyway, and Kurogiri catches the mug he dropped before it can shatter. Jean tries again. "Do you remember anything?" Kurogiri knows what he's asking. Anything from before. He thinks on this while he finishes drying the last few mugs. "Flashes," he says. "A cat. A rooftop. I believe I used to love sushi. There's a woman with dark hair, and 2 men. Someone arguing over goggles. I know I wasn't this tall." Kurogiri chuckles softly. "There's smaller things, too. Breath on my neck from a hug. I know I had a mother, but I don't know anything about her. I don't even remember what exactly I called her. There's some kids. I'm being pressed down by rocks. It hurts." "It was a building," Jean says. He clears his throat. "A villain was causing a ruckus. I didn't know what was going on. I was still a kid. You were just a kid." There's something in him that laughs even though this isn't funny. A clone trying to get out, maybe. "But there were some little guys, elementary schoolers. You were—" Jean's left arm hikes up to his ear with a violent tick that leaves him aching, and he has to roll his neck to ease the tremors before continuing. "You were helping them evacuate. I was frozen stiff across the street. I saw the kids. I saw the rubble falling. I wanted to help." He laughs bitterly. "I just kept thinking, better dead than saved by me, which is horse shit. But I was a kid, and ain't nobody ever told me I was worth more than the shoes on my feet. Anyway, I saw you then. Hair like yours isn't common, and it's hard to forget the first person who ever died in front of you like that. Your friends swore you were alive in front of cameras and everything until they saw your corpse." Kurogiri is absolutely still. The smoke flickers around his joints, but it's mostly dissipated. leaving the blue hair and scarred skin exposed, erasing any doubt Jean might have had. "What are you saying, exactly?" Kurogiri asked slowly, voice as placid as ever, even though his blue eyes are wide and filled with tears. "I'm saying, your name used to be Shirakumo Oboro. You used to be a hero in training." Chapter 36. Phase 4, Song 7, American Healthcare, Glitzy, by Penelope Scott. It's 58 pages, and it's on every screen in Japan and most screens abroad. Villains make demands every day, but they're usually not so litigative. And not usually preceded by so much fanfare. The last 12 pages are filled with as many signature lines as can reasonably fit, and more signature pages are being added hourly as heroes, hero agencies, corporations, schools, brands, manufacturers, legislators, and even just normal civilians scramble to sign before the timer ticks away. They have no idea what the timer means, but the League has proven that they're not shy about ruining careers and reputations, and nobody wants to know how far they're willing to go. It is not lost on anyone at UA that there are as many hours on that timer as there are students left in Class 1A. UA has another day without classes because all auxiliary teachers are patrolling the grounds. Shota has been instructed not to let his kids out of sight for any reason. Hizashi is there, officially for potential backup, but really for emotional support. Everyone assumes Shota will need it, with the way he's been lately. He doesn't. He and Hizashi kind of chuckle at the patrolling. They talked to Izuku a week and a half ago when he dropped the Shie Hisaikai's main fighting force, pretty much bound with a bow on their doorstep. Or on Shota's office doorstep, but same difference. Nobody changes that much in 10 days. Eri has made Shoji her jungle gym today, and having to keep track of a squirming toddler seems to be distracting most of the class from the anxiety that the situation is trying to inflict on them. Still, the energy of the class is muted, a far cry from what they were when Midoriya, Todoroki, and Yaoyorozu were there, when Shinsou was a few halls over and visiting Kaminari between classes. For now, about half the class is distracted with Eri's antics, but it's a melancholy atmosphere nonetheless. For all that Shota knows, and for all that he has done and learned these past few weeks, he doesn't know what to do about this. He can try, and he has, but he knows that just because he tries doesn't mean he never fails. The timer does not worry the kids. The timer depresses them. They miss their friends. Kaminari fried his brain yesterday during heroics class on purpose. Recovery Girl asked him why. All Might had explained to her how low the stakes of the assignment had been when she had breathed in on an admonition, and he shrugged. After class that day, Kaminari had waffled by the door, and Shota had waited after with him, and Kaminari had broken in half with wet sobs that fizzled with static, and he said that he missed them. All of them. Not just Toshi, I miss Momo and Izuku and Shota too. I want them back. Shota had no idea what to say to that. He still doesn't. Just because they're not going to kill their classmates doesn't mean the wayward students are coming back. Not soon. Maybe not at all. Shota has no reassurance to offer. In fact, he'd really like some reassurance himself. Hizashi leans on him. They're both sitting at the teacher's desk. Ida told them that sitting on the desk is unprofessional, and Shota waved him off and said it's not like they're committing sacrilege, and Ida turned to try and get Bakugo to take his feet off his desk with the same gusto, and Hizashi backed Ida up, which Bakugo called hypocritical, and Shota pointed out that shoes on a desk is very different from just sitting. So Bakugo is sitting cross-legged in his chair, and Ida is saying that's just as bad, and Kirishima joins in to mediate. It's bright, but it's subdued too. They're rowdy, but not as rambunctious as usual. Jiro still can't quite smile. Kaminari is still tucked into himself. Bakugo actually unfolds his legs and sits normally. Eri allows herself to be tucked into Shoji's arms like a swaddle and giggles and says, "Mr. Aizawa, he's a blanket." Shoji goes pink at the ears, but at least the morosity creeps back to the shadows for a moment. "Mr. Aizawa, Mr. Zashi, do you see?" "We see it, little listener," Hizashi says. He smiles, but something sits a little darker on his face. Shota leans close to whisper, "What is it?" Hizashi shakes his head, fingers twisting at the end of his braid. "You know what?" he says eventually. "This won't do." Then he stands. He calls, "Mina!" And Mina stands up at attention, where she had been chatting with Hagakure and Sato in the back of the room, and Hizashi says, Can I give you a leadership role for the day? And Mina crosses her arms, tilts her chin challengingly, and says, What you need? Hisashi says, You know any good dances? Mina's face lights up. Hagakure claps excitedly, and so do Kirishima and Aoyama. About half the class groans emphatically and says Mina's too tough of a teacher. Kaminari speaks for the first time that day to say, My buddy doesn't bend like yours, Mina. But then they brighten up a bit as Hisashi and Shota tell them, Yes, your assignment for the day is to learn one of Mina's dances, and if you finish early, then you have to help Eri color a mural on some poster board. Shota smiles at Hisashi warmly, squeezing their fingers together. Hisashi feels it warm his bones, and he leans closer into his husband's shoulder. He knows Shota is thinking his thanks for Hisashi getting the kids' mind off things. He knows that later Shota will drop his head in his hands and say, I had no idea what to do. And he'll beat himself up about this perceived failure for days at least. They're both learning, and that means sometimes you don't know what to do, and you default to old habits, and Shota's old habit is to shut down. He's better about it now, but Hisashi remembers how he was after Oboro. Shota had denied Oboro was dead until they unearthed the body, and there was so much blood it was hard to identify anything about him. But that blue hair was a giveaway. The three of them, Shota and Nomuri and Hisashi, had all collapsed in their various ways. It wasn't 6 weeks before Hisashi was going to bed and waking up so drunk he couldn't see straight. It helped him feel better, he thought. If he could keep himself underwater with alcohol, he could just smile and yell and keep going to his shift like normal. He could keep laughing that way. He told himself that's what Oboro would have wanted. For months. Then Nomuri, she was the first one to drag herself out of it because she had never really allowed herself to get fully dragged under. She was tougher than the rest of them that way. Hisashi remembers her grabbing his collar, dragging him out of the liquor store, alcohol still on the shelf. She dragged him to a park bench and gave him an address for a support group meeting on Tuesdays and a phone number for a rehab center, and she told him to pick one. Hisashi told her she was crazy, and she said he needed to dry out, and he told her she was fucking insane, and he was fine, great even. She said she would kidnap him and drop him off at the rehab center if she had to, and he had told her, oh, fuck off. What, is Shota gonna pop out of that bush or something? This is fucking intervention now. And she had said, yes, this is an intervention, and no, he's not gonna pop out of the bush because he's missing. And Hisashi was too far gone to sober up just like that, but he may as well have. For the first time in 92 days, he realized how bad his hands were shaking, how heavy his breath felt in his mouth, the way his shoulders were hitched and sloped. He's what? He had whispered. And Nomuri had gotten past the stinky alcohol breath, somehow, and hugged him, and said, the manager of his apartment building said she hasn't seen him in a while, that he didn't make rent last week. She's holding the place for him, but apparently he's... Her voice had caught there, and she didn't finish that sentence. She just moved on and started another, the way she does. I'm looking for him, but you knew him better, and you can't help me find him while you're like this. And Hisashi wanted to fight her on that. He wanted to say, no, I'm fine this way. The station says their numbers have never been higher, and I haven't slipped up on patrol once yet. But he was scared shitless because what if she was right? As horrible as it was to say, Hisashi could take those chances on patrol because he didn't know those people, and some part of himself had numbed when he saw them zip up Oboro's body bag, and he didn't care, but Shota. He couldn't risk Shota, not after everything else. He cold turkeyed it. It almost killed him. Nomuri had to rush him to the hospital on day 4 because he hit delirium tremors and was convinced Oboro had become a rain cloud in his studio apartment, and he had scraped his hands raw trying to dry up the imaginary water. He was in the hospital for 4 days, under close watch. Nomuri poked her head in on occasion, but mostly she was out on patrol for work or looking for Shota. The moment the doctor said he could get out of those IV lines, he signed his release papers, with Nomuri as a co-signer, given his reason for intake. And he was out looking too. They searched all Shota's old spots, the construction around the buildings where Oboro died, homeless shelters. Nothing for 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were worse than the detox. He still had the sweats and the shakes and the nausea and anxiety and headaches. But now, there was the genuine bone-deep fear that his stupid fucking drinking made him too late, and now he was going to lose Oboro and Shota too. Nezu called them, after 18 days of searching, because of course Nezu found him. I found him sleeping on a bench while I was taking my morning walk, Nezu had said, and never elaborated despite the fact that he doesn't take walks, and even if he did, there was no way that's how he found him. Shoto was in Nezu's office, scarfing down takeout like Hisashi had never seen, and when he saw Hisashi Namuri, he paused, wiped his face with his disgusting sweater sleeve, averted his eyes, and said, "Hey, Nem. Hisashi, you look like shit." And Namuri, relieved to find him alive and exhausted from being the strong one for 4 months, broke down on the floor. And Hisashi didn't know what to do, so he fell back on old habits and laughed. "You aren't looking too hot yourself. I thought you were a classroom anatomy skeleton for a second." Later, Shoto would explain how he hadn't left his apartment in weeks and decided he needed groceries, and once he got to the store he was too afraid to go back home. The dark corners and empty shadows. And then, of course, Hisashi tells him they can room together, and Namuri says not without her babysitting they're not, and then it was the 3 of them again. Now, Namuri helps the other pros patrol the school, and Shoto squeezes Hisashi's fingers, and Hisashi laughs and tells Kota to really put his whole chest into it when he dances. Shuzenji Chio has been working for UA for 20 years now, ever since her retirement from official hero work. She likes her job. She loves the little kiddos. She loves the youthful energy of the teachers. She loves that Nezu knows better than to mess with her, and so she gets her own little pocket of the school to herself. Sure, since the establishment of the dorm system, it's harder for her to spend time with her grandkids, but her daughter, Tamayo, and her son-in-law, Takero, are good about picking her up at the station on Friday evenings and dropping her off again on Monday mornings. She still gets to see little June and baby Emmy on weekends, and that's all fine. She truly is happy with her life, and she truly does love her job. Still, she marches to Nezu's office with a hard candy in her coat pocket and a paper in her hand. She knocks. Nezu bids her enter, and he does not seem surprised to see her, but he does seem surprised by the paper in her hand. "Shuzenji," he says cheerfully. "How are you this afternoon? To what do I owe the pleasure? Please, sit. She sits, and Nezu busies himself amicably with the trappings of a pot of tea. He sets a steaming cup in front of her and smiles as he settles into his spot in the lounge chair opposite to her, sipping his tea quietly. "Nezu," Chio starts. "This is a wonderful school." Nezu lowers his tea in his paws, smiling politely. "That it is," he says. "But it is staffed by idiots." "That it is." Chio sets her paper on the coffee table between them. "I'll just cut right to it then. Nezu, I'm retiring." Nezu sets his tea down on the coffee table, which Chio supposes is the closest she'll get to dropping his jaw. He takes a moment to compose himself, then grips his tea once again between 2 paws. "May I ask why?" "I am done being complicit in the way this school treats its children," she says. They've had this debate before, several times. Nezu always maintained that allowing the teachers leeway to train the students as they chose led to higher numbers of high-ranked alumni. Chio, for all her privileges, could never persuade him otherwise. Today is different. Today, Chio is taking herself out of the equation. "I'm leaving, so you can't use me to patch up all the mistakes in your curriculum. From today on, if any children injure themselves beyond repair, I won't be here to kiss it better. I'm taking the school off its training wheels," she says. "It's time for you to do better." "Is there anything I can do to convince you to stay?" Nezu asks, voice tight. This decision of Chio's is putting Nezu in a tight spot. She knows this. The whole hero course will have to change its curriculum, make it softer, design it with children in mind, not seasoned pros with unlimited bodily resets. This won't be easy to sell to the teachers, and will be even harder to actually implement after decades of reckless abandon with Chio as the steadfast safety net. Chio sets down her tea. "No, there is not." Nezu takes a sip of his tea, speechless for once in his life. He thinks for a long moment. He asks, "What will you do now?" Chio smiles, folds her hands over her lap. "I think I'll go visit my grandchildren. Little June is almost 8, you know, and baby Emmy is almost big enough for kindergarten. She tells me every time I'm there that she's not a baby anymore. Have I shown you pictures of them?" Nezu obliges this one last privilege, and they spend the afternoon looking at pictures of Chio's grandchildren. For Nezu, these last few hours allow him to say to any future nagging teachers wondering how the school lost its magical nurse, "I kept her for hours, begging her to stay." For Chio and Nezu, it is the goodbye of old friends, though they know they may well see each other again. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 36 of Watch Your Heroes Fall. Chapter 37 will be up next. Hope you all are still enjoying, and as always, thank you so much for listening.